Ms. Songas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Secretary Hagel and Mr. Preston. It's great to have you here today. I think the issues we've been talking about today really do merit the serious discussion that we've been having here. But I'd like to begin by reiterating the point that we as a nation have a solemn responsibility to bring home every serviceman or woman who volunteers to put on the uniform and places themselves in harm's way on behalf of the values our nation holds dear and on behalf of each and every one of us. It's the abiding promise we make. And it was the underlying motivator in the actions that our President has taken with your guidance and advice and consent. Just briefly like to address the issue of notice that's received so much discussion. It's clear that as we look at the actions that took place in 2011, 2012, in the context of a possible reconciliation process, there was indeed generalized notice. I think that members of Congress knew that there might be 5 Taliban who would be exchanged for Sergeant Bergdahl in an effort to bring him home. So on that front, I don't think there's deep surprise that this is actually would possibly take place. But a lot of the concern has been on the issue of specific notice, and I think it troubles all of us given the 2014 NDAA. On the other hand, I do think the exigent circumstances that you've described, the quick turn of events that necessitated quick action, made the 30 days notice a tough one. But I do think a little heads up, maybe a couple hours call to the leaders of the Congress might have served you all very well. And that being said, I also note that what you have said, this was not a simple transfer, but a military action and conducted very well by our military who was put in harm's way. And I commend those soldiers for pulling this off as they did without incident. But I'd actually like to address another aspect of Section 1035 of the NDAA, and that is the need to put in place mitigating circumstances, that you have a level of comfort that these released detainees will be held as promised and not quickly put back in the battle place. Can you talk about that a bit? I know some of it you will revisit or visit in a classified setting, but
as you note, I mentioned about 4 general areas that are included in the specifics of the Memorandum of Understanding on the enforcement commitments made by the government of Qatar, personally made in a telephone conversation with President Obama. I can't get into the specifics until we get into this closed session on the real most significant parts of that MOU assurance, which we all assessed. Every agency in the government who signed off on this decision all agreed that those were strong enforcement mechanisms that would give us some significant reassurance that those 5 individuals would be kept in Qatar, and all the other assurances as to their activity. And again, we can go into the specifics of that.
The track record hasn't been great. So what do you have, up your sleeve that you feel comfortable will allow you to carefully monitor the situation?
Recognizing what you just said, the dimensions now that we are looking at, too, that have changed a bit in Qatar. You have a new leader in Qatar, a new emir. Over the last year. We have a significant United States force presence in Qatar. Many of you have visited our base there. We have thousands of people there. We have some significant relationship with the government of Qatar. They've had difficulties with their neighbors. I think the geopolitical arrangements that they would like to see change, I can't speak for them, but you asked me some of my thoughts, I think put a different face on this as well. And there are some other assurances that I don't want to address here in an open session. But suffice it to say, they were all strong enough to get the commitments that we each individually, each leader of each agency, came to the same conclusion as ultimately did the President, that it in fact was in the interest of our country and in fact did substantially mitigate the risks.
Thank you. This is a legitimate and real concern of, I know, of my constituents.
Well, it's a concern of ours.
And the memo of understanding will be made available again. It got to us last evening, and that'll be made available to all members of the committee in the proper setting. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we've had very important issues to discuss here. Obviously, one, the issue of notice to Congress. Two, the issue of judgment. Was this a good idea? And third issue, the policy of whether or not this is a shift from our policy of not negotiating with terrorists. We had a briefing on Monday from Mr. Tony Blinken, Deputy National Security Advisor of the President, Ambassador Dobbins, Department of State, Mr. Work, Department of Defense, Admiral Winfield, Joint Chiefs, Vice Chairman, and Robert Cardillo, Deputy Director for Intelligence on Monday. I asked them this question: can you cite any precedent for this nature of a swap, where we have swapped with a non-nation state in the last 40 years? And Mr. Preston, you were asked this same question by our ranking member, and you cited the exchange, the securing the release of helicopter pilot Michael Durant from Warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. You used the words, it was a functionally exchanged. Now, the five briefers, of course, said that they had, when I asked them that question, that there was no precedent, that we had not done any exchange with non-sovereign states within the last 40 years. Now, Mr. Preston, I want to point out to you that when helicopter pilot Michael Durant was released in Somalia, Mohammed Aidid said that he did so, he released Durant, as a result of a gesture of goodwill, and President Clinton immediately called a press conference. President Clinton stated that, I want to emphasize that we made no deals to secure the release of Chief Warrant Officer Durant. Clinton said at his press conference, we have strong resolve. We show that we're willing to resort to the resumption of the peace process, and he goes on. And then he says, Clinton said that it will be a UN decision whether to release the 32 Aidid aides captured by UN forces. Their release was demanded by Aidid, but Clinton says that there were absolutely no deals to secure his release. Now, you've said that Mr. Durant's release was a result of a functional exchange. And the five that we had briefers on Monday said there was no precedent of a non-sovereign state. Mr. Preston, was President Clinton lying at his press conference, or would you like to retract your testimony that Durant's release was secured as a result of an exchange by the United States government of prisoners?
Sir, I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that the former president lied, and I don't think I need to recant my statement. I was trying to be responsive.
Okay, well, I only have 5 minutes. So, Mr. Preston, in your response, then, I would like you in writing to provide additional information as to the exchange that occurred to secure Mr. Durant, because there is no public evidence or discussion of anything of that nature. In fact, there are disclaimers, including by the President of the United States, Mr. Clinton. It doesn't appear that on the record, this would be precedent for this Taliban swap, and I would like you to explain that, and that we can release it to the public so they can understand the true nature of Durant's release.
It certainly
Mr.
wouldn't be
Secretary.
on all fours, but it would be an example of...
Mr. President,
dealing with
you cited that in this hearing. I would like the details of that exchange in writing provided to this committee.
Understand.
Thank you, Mr. Preston. Now, Mr. Secretary, the confusion in this is because of the issue of the policy of we don't negotiate with terrorists. Now, you said that you don't want to talk about who held Mr. Bergdahl, whether or not it was Haqqani, unless we're in classified session, which I can understand your preference to being that. However, the Haqqani network says that they were the ones holding him. Time magazine says they were the one holding him. Washington Post says that they were the ones holding them. It's reported openly in the Washington Free Beacon, the Daily Beast, Newsmax, all say that it was Haqqani. Now, the State Department lists the Haqqani network as an international terrorist organization. Mr. Secretary, do you disagree with the State Department's designation of the Haqqani network as a terrorist organization?
No, I acknowledged that earlier this morning.
Excellent. Next question. Mr. Secretary, do you agree that it has been the standing policy of the United States that we do not negotiate with terrorists?
Yes, I agree.
Mr. Secretary, would you please explain to me how then that we could have been in a negotiation that included the Haqqani network, because they certainly were involved in the capture, holding, and release of Sergeant Bergdahl. How is it the United States could have been in negotiations with the Haqqani network, a listed terrorist organization, and it not conflict with our policy that we do not negotiate with terrorists?
We dealt directly with the government of Qatar.
Oh, that's our footnote now. So now the new policy of this administration is we don't negotiate with terrorists directly.
Well, Congressman, you didn't let me finish.
No, Mr. Secretary, that's what you said.
I did say it, but you cut me off before I could say the other part, that we were dealing with the Taliban. Now, I actually dealt with this question earlier this morning about the Haqqani network holding at different times.
Actually, you deferred and said we'd talk in classified session, but it's well known.
But I also said that
It's well known,
the
well known.
Haqqani network was holding him at different times.
Secretary, thank you for the clarification that as long as it's not direct, that we will negotiate with terrorists under this
We didn't
administration.
negotiate with terrorists, Congressman.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our distinguished witnesses. I wish that this committee would not be so prosecutorial in its tone. I think it's very important that this not become a political football. I don't know if my friend on the other side of the aisle is already running for majority leader or not, but it sounds like the tone here is way too political. I think, at least for the audience back home, people need to understand, in case some people have forgotten, that our Secretary of Defense is a distinguished former United States Senator of the Republican Party with a distinguished war record in Vietnam. So hopefully this committee will not cast aspersions on anyone and certainly not impugn their patriotism. The chairman tried to narrow the scope of this hearing with his opening statement, and I think he essentially wanted to confine it to the 30-day notice requirement that this Congress perhaps should have received on this prisoner transfer. I think that if the committee hearing were in fact narrowed to that point, it would not be the near media circus that it's become. Not only would many members of the press not have shown up, but many members of this committee would not have shown up. So let's try to de-escalate the tensions here. Let's try to focus on the substance. Let's try to be fair to each other and hopefully bipartisan, because as the chairman correctly noted, this committee is noted for its bipartisanship and its fairness. It was a great triumph for the chairman in the Buck-McKeon Defense Authorization Bill for it to be passed out of this committee unanimously and overwhelmingly on the floor. That's the way our nation should approach its national defense. In unity, there is strength. So hopefully my colleagues will focus on what's really important here. There's been a lot of discussion about precedent, and no one wants to set a bad precedent for us, the greatest country in the history of the world. But I think that if there is any precedential effect of this decision, it is the vitally important principle that so many of our generals and admirals and others have reiterated: leave no man behind. That's the message of this possibly politically unpopular decision. That's leave no man behind. We can investigate what he did or didn't do once he's safely back in our custody, once he's been presumed innocent, and the regular course of justice can take its place. But I'm shocked, really, that this has become such a political football and such unfairness, as the Secretary of Defense quite rightly pointed out, not only toward our man in uniform, but toward his family. You know, I don't know the particulars, but justice will take its course. That's the nature of this country. That's the nature of our constitutional guarantees. And as the Secretary of Defense also pointed out, not only is this person a U.S. citizen, he's a person who volunteered to wear the uniform. So he should be given the benefit of the doubt. Let justice take its course. I would like to ask Mr. Preston, in a much less prosecutorial tone than some of the earlier questions, do you think that the 30-day notice requirement for Congress that was in the last NDAA was in fact a constitutional provision? Does the commander-in-chief, any commander-in-chief of either party, have the right to take action, when time requires it, to protect the life of a serviceman, to perhaps circumvent 30-day notice requirements to this body? And it was my impression also that the Senate Majority Leader, Mr. Reed, said that he had in fact been notified. I don't know the extent of notification.
Thank you for the question. Sir, we believe the provision is constitutional. The question was the constitutional implications of its application in the particular circumstances here. And the administration determined that it was necessary to forego the full 30-day formal notice to the 8 committees under the constellation of circumstances presented in this situation in which the President was seeking to free a service member in captivity and in peril. The circumstances can be described in terms of the fragility of the negotiations and concerns about delay and leaks and the impact in a premature ending of the negotiation, the circumstance of a fleeting opportunity to effectuate the exchange. The Secretary mentioned that from the time it was decided to do an exchange to the actual execution was something on the order of 96 hours. The potential harm to Sergeant Bergdahl if the deal became public. All this in the context and backdrop of uncertainty as to his physical condition and the realization that this might be our last best chance to get him. It was in that circumstance, Mr. Chairman, if I could just finish, it was in that circumstance that with the deal coming together and the prospect of having a decision to transfer, the concern was that delaying at that point for 30 days to effectuate notice of the transfer would scuttle the deal and could possibly further endanger Sergeant Bergdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time has expired.
You know, we can hammer on this and hammer on it, but the point is those negotiations started last January. You had talked to us about it in November of 11. Neither of you were in your jobs then. So when I say you, I mean the department had talked to us in November of 11. When those negotiations blew up in February of 12, you came to us and said, if we start the negotiations again, we will come back to you. That didn't happen. And so I understand when you're down to the final days and you're planning the operation itself and putting those things together, yeah, that is real crunch time when you're down to a few days. But that was the end of May. What about January, February, March, April? There was plenty of time. You had time to talk to the Department of Justice. 80 or 90 people were informed and knew about this, but Congress was not informed. And I guess the reason I think they weren't informed is because when you originally brought it up back in November of 11 and January and February of 12, because you had real pushback from Congress. They didn't want those 5 guys released. And so then this time you just decided we'll bypass Congress and deal with it after.
Let me address that.
That's the problem I have with all this.
If I could address that with reference to the 30-day notice requirement specifically, that's keyed to a transfer. And in this instance, there was no decision to transfer and could be no decision to transfer.
When you started the negotiations in January and February, as a result of the tape that you saw of Sergeant Bergdahl, you entered into a negotiation just as you had been a few years before. It was transferring 5 detainees for the 1 prisoner or hostage or whatever we're going to call him. That didn't change. All that changed was you got closer to an actual deal.
We did not have a decision to transfer and could not have a decision to transfer until we had security assurances in place, which was May 12, and until there was an agreement to exchange, which was May 27th.
Then why did you talk to us about it in November of 11?
I understand that there's a serious issue here which the Secretary has addressed about the relationship and communication. What I'm trying to focus on is what would trigger the statutory 30-day notice requirement, and that would be a transfer. We did not have a decision to transfer until that last week.
You don't need an exact date of the transfer to begin the 30 days notice.
It's notice of the transfer. That means there has to have been a decision to transfer.
Okay, we're probably not going to agree on this. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I was somewhat amused by the gentleman from Tennessee's admonition of my colleagues for taking a prosecutorial approach. Amused because I remember very well a few years ago when the gentleman would hold up a newspaper headline and address the representatives of a Republican administration in what one could see as a prosecutorial manner. Nevertheless, Mr. Secretary, let me ask you a question that we've been around all morning. Who specifically selected the particular detainees that were transferred?
The 5 detainees that were transferred have been the subject of conversation, negotiation over a period of time. They just didn't appear on anybody's scope. These are individuals that we have been talking about, as the chairman noted and I mentioned. I wasn't there at the time in 2011, as he noted in 2012, but I am aware that members that were briefed on these 5 individuals, members of the Congress, disagreed with these 5 individuals. Where those 5 individuals initially came from, I don't know all the history to that, Congressman.
Okay, I thank you for that, but somebody made the decision that these 5 were going to be transferred at the end. Now, there could have been discussions for going on for months, but somebody made that decision. Who was it?
Well,
in May?
The decision to transfer, if that's your question.
To transfer specifically these 5?
Well, those decisions were made by ultimately the President, but we all in the National Security Council agreed, once we had all the assurances in place, the things that Steve Preston has talked about. So if that's your question.
I guess we're going to talk past each other here, because at some point somebody decided that it would be specifically these 5, and I'm just trying to figure out who that was. You said in response, or in a conversation with Ms. Davis earlier, they wanted all the Taliban detainees. Who's they?
The Taliban.
The Taliban. Okay,
At one
so
point in these discussions, this before my time, by the way.
Right. So you can see why there is, I hope you can see why there's a lot of confusion here, because you've been very careful to say on more than one occasion that you were not negotiating with terrorists. You even said you weren't negotiating with the Taliban because you were negotiating with the Emir of Qatar. And so we've had some pretty tortuous, I would say, tortuous legal responses to questions we're trying to get at when we're just trying to find out the basics here. Mr. Preston, of course, he is a lawyer, but he's come back with, in response to the chairman and others, well, we didn't know because we didn't have a decision date. I think that was the answer. It was just right here, and that therefore the 30 days didn't start because we specifically hadn't made a decision. And Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry, but these responses are very, very tortuous as we're trying to weave around here legalities. And I understand there are a lot of lawyers and probably a lot of them here on the committee, but fundamentally, I'm just trying to understand who made the decision, when it was made to do the transfer, and who made the decision on the notification and why. And so we're just walking around here, and I'll just close because my time is rapidly running out by saying that this confusion leads to this belief that was expressed by Mr. Turner and others that, in fact, the United States did set a precedent, did break the policy of negotiating with terrorists. Because despite the maneuvering of the little pieces about, well, I can't really say if it's Haqqani, who it's a designated terrorist network, it was really the Taliban, but we really weren't talking to the Taliban either because we were talking to Qatar. I'm sorry, I think all of that just adds to the confusion and to the perception. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
May I just quickly respond? I notice the Congressman has 20 seconds. Just a general response.
Sure.
I'm taking care of your time.
17 seconds now.
Yes, there was confusion. I've said that this was imperfect, imprecise. Just to go back to a timeline, we didn't even engage here in Qatar until April. Yes, there was just exactly what the General Counsel has said, what I've said. Sure, there was confusion. There was imprecision. We didn't know from day to day what we had, what we didn't have. Questions over here about the Taliban not having a good track record on keeping their word. They're in, they're out. We had to have assurances, what Steve's talked about, what I've talked. Absolutely. Absolutely there was. A lot of confusion. But through that, we had to stay focused on what the objective was, and that was getting an American POW back with the reassurances that we needed to be able to say it would substantially mitigate the risk and it was in the interest of our country. That was the objective, and that's what we tried to do. And I know there are differences, I know there are questions, I get it. But we did get him back, and we don't have any more POWs.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could, just on the point of who we negotiated with, to clarify this. Originally, this was all worked through the Qataris, and they were talking with the Taliban. Originally, we were going to have connection. So there's no evidence whatsoever that we, or even the Qataris for that matter, negotiated with the Haqqani network. It was always the Taliban. It was the Taliban reaching out to Doha and then reaching out to us. So it's pretty straightforward that the people we were negotiating with were the Taliban. Who held him when, where, whatever, but the people we were talking to about his release, the people who apparently controlled his release, was the former Taliban government, now the insurgents. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, my only gloss on that would be, my understanding is in the very early going, there were direct talks between the U.S. government and the Taliban, and then it later became indirect with the Qataris. But there was never a point in time where either directly or through the Qataris we were negotiating with Haqqani. There were no demands made or concessions made by or to the Haqqanis, as far as I'm aware of, period.
I was going to use an example earlier, but Mr. Runyon had to leave. Professional football player. I probably had an agent. The agent probably negotiated for him. The owner probably has somebody, a general manager, somebody negotiates for him. But at the end of the day, it's the football team negotiating with the player, even though the player and the football team aren't there. It's other people negotiating that. So is the Haqqani part of the Taliban? What's the relationship between the Haqqani and the Taliban?
To tell you the truth, you're out of my area, and this is something the intelligence community folks could address better.
Mine too, and I'm not an attorney. I just asking the question. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for your effort to set the scope and the tone of this hearing, which I think most members have adhered to, and I want to thank you for that. And I think this is the way that this is the tone that we should have in this hearing, because this is a legitimate issue of legislative oversight. And Secretary Hagel, I am apologetic to you for not having been able to repeat your first answer to the question about whether or not we negotiated with terrorists. It's clear that we did not do so, and I want to ask you some questions, Mr. Preston. You're the attorney, and so you're familiar with the Constitution and the separation of powers and the power of the executive insofar as being the commander-in-chief. And those duties and obligations are not specifically set forth in the Constitution or limited in any way. would you agree with me that Section 1035 of the Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2014 restricted the transfer of Gitmo detainees by the Commander-in-Chief without giving 30 days notice? Would you agree that that restriction is on the power of the Commander-in-Chief?
No, I would agree with that, sir,
And would you also agree that the purpose of that provision was to, in effect, require congressional approval before the President could utilize the power of Commander-in-Chief to transfer a detainee without giving 30 days notice to Congress? Would you agree?
I understand that to be the general intent.
And would you further agree with the signing statement that President Obama issued in signing the National Defense Authorization Act that this was an unnecessary limitation, or an unwarranted limitation, let me put it like that, not unnecessary, but he said unwarranted limitation, and violates the constitutional separation of powers principle?
Yes, I understand that the signing statement, served for the President to make clear his view that these restrictions in application could impinge upon his constitutional authority.
Yes, and isn't it a fact also that Section 1035 of that National Defense Authorization Act does not make any provisions for a time-sensitive prisoner exchange negotiation of the sort that we have with Mr. Bergdahl? Would you agree that the NDAA does not provide for that circumstance?
Not by its express terms, yes, I agree.
What would be the effect on the nation, on the institution of the presidency, if the president were to comply with this undue restriction and seek 30-day approval from Congress before dealing with an emergent situation?
Well, let me first point out that the executive has consistently adhered to these provisions in all previous transfers. And I wouldn't want this transfer in connection with the Bergdahl exchange to be interpreted as an exception to the statute whenever there are emergent situations. You could imagine any number of emergent situations. This was driven by the particular collection of circumstances involved here, in which the concern was that if in the process of finalizing this deal and executing on the exchange, there had to be a delay for formal notice that it would stand to scuttle the deal and quite possibly endanger the individual.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Just for the record, it probably doesn't matter whether we would agree that that's a restriction or an unnecessary restriction. It was the law. It was passed out of this committee. It was passed on the floor of the House. It was passed on the Senate and the House in a final form and signed by the President. Granted, he did write a note that he didn't think it was constitutional, but until the Supreme Court acts and says it's not constitutional, it is, as Mr. Smith said earlier, the law. Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you for being here. Mr. Secretary, I believe, as I know you do, that one of America's greatest and most sacred treasures is the men and women in uniform who risk and sometimes sacrifice their lives for the cause of American freedom. And further, that as a nation, we do indeed owe it to each one of them to carry them from the battlefield and back to their home and families. And it's also my belief that these heroes, down to the last person, would reject gaining their release through an unprecedented negotiation with jihadist terrorists that would categorically break American law, that would return 5 high-value terrorists, that would diminish the security of the United States, and that would place a bounty on all of our men and women in uniform, and ultimately, essentially weaken America's hold on this priceless freedom for which generations have fought and died. Mr. Secretary, I also agree with you that every one of our military personnel should know that if they are captured by the enemy, that we will come and get them. But that isn't what happened here. What happened here is that the Obama administration has now telegraphed to terrorists the world over that all they have to do is to kidnap or capture an American soldier or citizen, and that the United States will capitulate and free some of their most dangerous terrorist leaders. Now, Mr. Secretary, I want to say this the right way, but for the last 5 years, the American people and terrorists themselves have watched in astonishment and disbelief as this administration has handed back blood-bought gains to our enemies. And I believe the result is that somewhere in this world, this moment, that there are terrorists watching this hearing in complete jubilation. And so my question is, do you believe that this, what I believe to be an illegal trade, is going to intensify the terrorist policy that you mentioned and their efforts to kidnap American citizens and personnel of our military forces across the world that would afford them the obvious leverage that they've gained here in this case?
Congressman, as I've said before, our military is always at risk, especially in war. Afghanistan is one such place. So those men and women are at risk and have been.
But has this intensified the terrorists' efforts here and their policy?
If I believed that that would have been the case, I would have never signed off on this. As I said earlier, the Taliban's position on trying to capture American servicemen and women had been very clear for 12 years.
But certainly this deal has undergirded that policy. Certainly this seems to be one of those things that would encourage them to focus on it more.
I don't know how that would be after, for 12 years, it's been...
Well, the fact that they've got the entire American people focused on this debate, that they brought us into this kind of chaos, that they have gained these gains, certainly would tell me that they see that there's great value in doing that.
Well, you know, one issue that's not been mentioned here this morning is the tremendous progress the Afghan government has made, in particular the military. And I think that's rather measurable. Looking at the elections, we've got another election, the final next week. They're doing all of the combat missions themselves. Yes, they have a ways to go. But the reason I mention that, Congressman, is because this is a different world than it was 5 years ago in Afghanistan or 3 years ago. And the increased strength of the Afghan army and all the institutions of Afghanistan is a significant part of this. If I believed that it was going to increase the risk to our soldiers, I would have never, ever signed off on this.
Well, I don't doubt your sincerity in that regard, sir. I do profoundly, in all due respect, doubt your judgment on that front.
Well, that's fair.
So let me finally ask you, can you clarify for us, I didn't get it clear a moment ago, what is the connection or the relationship between the Haqqani network and the Taliban?
I don't know exactly the relationship. And by the way, I said in my statement the Haqqani network was holding Bergdahl. We know that there's an affiliation, there's an association. We don't know if the Taliban's had subcontracted to the Haqqanis to hold Bergdahl. We again can get down deeper in this in a classified
Well, I think that would be important for the record at some point. And
we don't know all of the pieces.
Well, I'm out of time, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your answers. And Mr. Chairman, I do believe that this effort has ultimately weakened America's freedom in the world.
Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for the balanced way that you have handled this hearing. Let me just say at the outset to my colleagues, I was somewhat stunned by one of the earlier questioners about Bo Bergdahl. And I would just ask us to think for a moment how we would be responding if Bo Bergdahl was our son. I really fear for his return to this country with the kind of rhetoric that is being spewed in this very room. To you, Secretary Hagel, thank you for your very persuasive presentation this morning and for your leadership. I'd like to ask kind of a fundamental question. In hindsight, which is always 20/20, do you think it would have been appropriate for you to have informed the leadership of both houses?
Well, Congresswoman, in hindsight, I suppose any of us in our own lives and every decision we've ever made, can we do it better? I mentioned that in my opening statement. Yes, we could have done this better, but I also said that we thought we had one shot here, and we were told by people that we were engaged with. This gentleman right here was on the ground in Qatar. We can go into more of the details. That any risk of any leak in anything, any security operations break, would jeopardize the deal. We didn't know what kind of health Bergdahl was in, for sure. All we had was a 6-month video. We did know that he had been transferred back and forth quite a bit. We were not sure where he was. 5 years in that captivity, and I don't think anybody on this committee would think that that was a walk in the park. And we'll find out more and more about it, but we do have some intelligence that's clear on this, on some of the conditions he was held in. So you factor it all in, and we were told that this may be your last shot at this. It was a judgment, that's right. Could we have done it better? Could we have done it smarter? And I would just add this. Does anybody on this committee really believe that I would want to come up to this committee, the President of the United States would want to take the criticism that he's taken on this issue intentionally if there wasn't a good reason?
All right, let's move on. Thank you.
I mean, come on. You can question our judgment on it. That's fair. But we did this because we were concerned enough with the fleeting opportunity we might miss it, and we just didn't want to risk any further security of operations. That's all.
In open hearing, can you provide us with information about how these 5 detainees were held? Were they subject to waterboarding, torture, or anything else when they were at Gitmo?
Let me ask our counsel on this, because I'm not aware of any kind of torture, or I don't know. I wasn't, I hadn't been around for the 12 years they were down there. I'm not aware of any situation that would have put them through any of that, but I don't know. I'll ask the General Counsel. I'm
not either, but I have not reviewed for that purpose.
Could you do that for us and report back to us?
We will.
In terms of their movement in Qatar, the first reports were that they were going to be housed in some secure location, and then word came out that no, they were going to be able to freely move throughout Qatar. If in fact they are freely moving throughout Qatar, do we have ankle bracelets on them? How are we in a position to know precisely where they are at every moment?
Well, this is we'll get into this, and I will answer your question, but this really needs to be in a classified setting. Short answer is yes, we have the kind of assurances we think are meaningful and enforceable, and we believe the Qatari government will enforce them, but we need to take this up in a classified hearing.
All right. My time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, trust is a fragile concept. And you said toward the end of your conversation that you broke trust with the committee and with Congress, and I would agree with that.
I didn't say I broke
Let me
trust with him.
finish.
I think I
Yeah,
said
well,
something different.
we can get the transcript out and we'll read it back to you. Over and over and over, you and Mr. Preston both have said, we don't trust Congress. We don't trust Congress. It's insulting, it's disrespectful, and I get it. And so our system of trying to deal with you and deal with us demands trust. You made a self-laudatory comment that you would never sign anything that was not in the national interest of our country, et cetera, et cetera. I have to trust that based on your word. I now cannot do that. And so you've put a rift in the entire system by choosing to not obey the spirit. Now, Mr. President, was very offensive that you tried to strain at a gnat on whenever that 30-day notification triggered. But Mr. Hagel, it is under the NDA, it's your responsibility to notify Congress. It is not the President's responsibility. You're to make that notification. Did you personally decide on your own to not do that?
I decided in consultation with the interagency, the President was aware of it.
So it's your call to not notify Congress. As a senator, can you
I notified Congress, but I
No, you
notified Congress when
not
we
within
had Bergdahl.
not even within the spirit of the 30 days. Even if you'd have done it in May 12th, whenever the MOU was signed, you would not hear this pushback from us, but you did it.
Congressman, I explained why the notification was handled the way it was.
Yeah, I know, and over.
By the
you
way,
said
I
you don't-
never said that I don't trust Congress. That's your word.
Yes, you did. Yes, you have.
I never said
over
I
and over.
don't
You
trust
said-
Congress.
All right.
You want to check
Mr.
the
Secretary,
transcript.
Mr. Secretary,
Congressman?
Mr. Secretary, were any of the detainees aware of the negotiations for their release?
Let me ask the General Counsel. I don't know.
So if we were
To the best
get-
of my knowledge, no.
So if we were to get the visitor logs and the flight manifests and Gitmo, it would not show that these guys were conferred with as a part of this process.
I don't.
All right, I'll take that blank
I don't
look
think
as a-
so.
as a-
But Congressman, I'm
The,
sure with the investigation, we're going to turn over everything
Yes,
we have.
and we would need to be able to trust you.
I get that.
But we don't. So,
Well,
with respect to the
but I
national-
never said I don't trust the Congress.
Your actions,
Those are your words.
No. Your actions.
No, I didn't say it. You
your
said I
actions-
said it.
Your actions demonstrate, Mr. Secretary, that you do not trust Congress because you wouldn't
Now it's
tell
my
the
action.
chairman and the ranking member something like this. Your actions say you don't trust Congress. I get it. With respect to the release of these 5 and the overall impact it has on the ability of the Taliban to work their mischief in Afghanistan, would you agree or disagree that a weakened Taliban would be better for Afghanistan than a stronger Taliban?
Yes.
Would you agree that the return of these 5 individuals, once they serve their halfway house nonsense in Qatar and get back into Afghanistan, will strengthen the Taliban and their efforts to do whatever it is they want to do in Afghanistan?
Maybe. Do you know that?
Maybe.
We don't know. We do know
We've already had
enough.
one of them say so in the open press, that that's in fact what he would do.
What's a fact? Somebody is projecting 12 months down the road, and that's a fact?
So you think the 12 months in this halfway house is going to somehow cure them of their hatred of America and their ability to want to not take back
That's
over
not
Afghanistan?
what I said, and that's not what we meant. But to
Mr.
say,
Secretary-
taking it as
Mr. Secretary,
fact,
there was
Congressman, something that
your-
hasn't
your-
happened
Mr.
and won't
Secretary,
happen for 12 months is a
the
bit of a
notification
leap.
concept under the January of 2012 had some broad parameters that said, here's what we'll do in terms of negotiating with the Taliban. Classified at this point, but nevertheless, there was a long list. The phrase, nothing's agreed to until everything's agreed to. Somewhere between January 12 and May 27th of 2014, that changed the deal that you notified, that you're trying to cling to, that you in fact notified Congress that this was going on. When did that change occur, and were you a part of that decision? Because the way I understand it, all we got was Sergeant Bergdahl, as important and wonderful as that is, that's it. We got no other agreements that were in those broad kind of conversations that you had with us, or the administration had with us in January 2012. None of that appears to have been a part of this deal whatsoever. When did we abandon that criteria, and why weren't we notified that that change was made?
When did we abandon that criteria? What criteria?
The criteria from January 12.
But what criteria are you talking about?
I can't tell you that. It's open session.
Well, we'll
Just like you
take it
can't
up
tell
in
me the
closed session
details of
then.
the
'Cause
MOU.
I don't know. I can't answer a question that you can't give me the question to.
I'll remember that next time we try to, never mind, Mr. President, Secretary. Get back.
Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Preston for being here today. Last week, during our recess, I was home in district, like I think all of us were, and I met with many veterans. I was in Sierra Vista, which is home to Fort Huachuca, and I had about 70 people come to my Congress on Your Corner event that weekend, and over again, virtually every one of them was a veteran. They said to me, "What's going on? We agree that we should never leave one of our armed forces behind." And I agree with that too. But they wanted me to know if it was appropriate that we released these detainees from Guantanamo in exchange for Sergeant Bergdahl. They asked, couldn't we have gotten a better deal? In your statement, Mr. Secretary, you say that this transfer was a tough call, and I'm sure it was, and that these detainees were enemy belligerents. One of the 5 detainees was the Deputy Minister of Intelligence, and another was the Deputy Minister of Defense for the Taliban. And yet you also stated that these detainees were appropriate in exchange because they had not been implicated in any attacks against the United States, and that you have no basis, we have no basis to prosecute them in federal court. I actually find these statements very difficult to accept, Mr. Secretary, given the status that these particular individuals had before they were captured. It's hard to believe that these individuals in these positions within the Taliban government had no role in attacks on Americans. So could you, Mr. Secretary, speak to this issue and explain to the people I represent and to this committee and those of us who are all across this country asking these questions, why you believe the release of these men was appropriate and it does not pose a threat to our national security?
Congressman, I mean, I think I've answered the question, and I think I addressed it. You quoted from my testimony, but let me start again. We recognize, as I said in my testimony, and I think the answers I've given this morning, that there are risks. There are always risks. There are going to be risks in a deal like this. We had to factor in every circumstance that we could factor in, our intelligence, where these guys came from, what facts we had on them, as you noted from my testimony. How big a risk would they be? How substantial could we mitigate those risks for our country, for our allies, for our citizens, our service members? We think we've done that. We think we've done it through a 12-month, pretty tight enforcement of a memorandum of understanding. We know that after 12 months, that's another deal. But factoring everything in, we all felt, everyone was secure on this in the National Security Council, signing off on this. Our number 1 and our number 2 uniformed military, General Dempsey, Admiral Winnefeld, that in fact we had substantially mitigated the risk to this country. And I believe that. I would not have signed it. The President wouldn't have signed it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me move to a second aspect of this issue. And I understand that this is hard to predict, but we, as you know, of course, have not been able to secure a bilateral security agreement with the Afghan government. President Karzai is on again, off again. He's been off signing that agreement for some time. I was in Afghanistan a couple of months ago, and I was wanting to find out how our troops were reacting to this situation, and particularly to the attacks, verbal attacks that President Karzai has made on our troops and our country. Of course, we have an election coming up in just a few days, but my question is, do you have any sense of how the release of these detainees will impact on the ability for us to secure a bilateral security agreement with the new administration, whoever that might be? Because clearly we've seen a lot of anger in Afghanistan over the release, and we wonder, obviously, how that might affect future agreements with the new Afghan president.
Congressman, as you know, the two finalists, one will be presumably the next president of Afghanistan, either Abdullah or Ghani, have both said and both reaffirmed that they, if elected president, one of the first things they would do is sign that bilateral security agreement. I have seen nothing to change that. We've heard nothing to change that. I believe that commitment is firm from either one of them, from both of them, and they've made that commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hagel, prisoner exchanges in the past, for instance, after the Korean War and the Vietnam War, were done after a peace deal had been hammered out. The President recently said about the Bergdahl deal, this is what happens at the end of wars, quote unquote. How is what is happening in Afghanistan the end of a war, other than the President has made a unilateral decision to remove our forces next year, no matter what the facts on the ground are? In other words, have we negotiated some type of peace with the Taliban, making this an end to the war?
Well, first part of the question, Congressman, I don't think anyone would have wanted us to wait if we had a chance to get Bergdahl until the so-called war is over. We had an opportunity to get him. It was a fleeting opportunity. We did it.
So the President was wrong when he said this is what happens at the end of wars.
No, that's the first part, if you'll let me finish. This decision the President made, this wasn't a new decision. You go back to the Lisbon NATO conference of 2010. It was established by the ISAF partners in NATO in 2010 that combat missions would come to an end at the end of 2014 for the United States and our ISAF partners. The only questions that remained up until about a month ago is how many forces would the President decide to leave behind in their missions, train, assist, advise, any terrorism. So that's not new. It wasn't any arbitrary.
Okay, the administration's position isn't new, but I don't understand how his unilateral decisions bring in the Taliban and make them a negotiating partner.
Well, I'm not sure he said that about what you just said. I'm not sure what you mean.
After Vietnam, after the Korean War, prisoner exchanges were done when a peace agreement was signed. This is unprecedented to have a release like this before there's even a peace agreement. All that's happened is the President said, we're withdrawing forces, and the Taliban are not a party to the negotiation. The Afghan government was not brought in on this, were they?
Well, this was a prisoner exchange, and again, I don't think the American people would have wanted us to wait. If we had a chance to get our POW.
But you keep saying that this is a prisoner release. It's not a deal with terrorists releasing a hostage. This is a negotiated prisoner release with a legitimate type of government. I don't see where the Taliban.
Well, I'm not sure I get your point, though, Congressman.
You're saying this was not a deal with terrorists. Is that correct?
That's right.
You said that the alternative is that this is a deal with a legitimate government of some kind, with a legitimate military, that we're in the process of hammering out a peace agreement. None of those things are happening.
The President didn't say we're in the process of hammering out a peace agreement. This was a prisoner exchange. I mentioned this morning in answer to one of the questions about, you go back to the 2012, 2011 days, there was the larger scope of reference of reconciliation and maybe the Taliban and Afghan government getting to a peace agreement. That's what we were talking about in 2011, 2012. Well, Taliban shut all that off, so this was a straight, let's get our prisoners, prisoner exchange.
Was the Afghan government brought in the loop on this decision during the negotiation?
No.
But you said earlier that this is an attempt to, among other things, reconcile the Afghan government and the Taliban.
No, I didn't say that.
You didn't say
I
that.
just said the opposite. I said this was not. I said in 2011 and 2012, there was a broad framework of reconciliation. That was 2011 and 2012. That has changed. That totally changed.
I'm just trying to understand how this is not a deal with terrorists holding a hostage. You cast this as a legitimate prisoner swap, and yet they are a terrorist organization. We're not
The
dealing-
Taliban have never been designated by us as a terrorist organization.
The Treasury Department says the Pakistan Taliban is a terrorist organization.
The Pakistan Taliban.
And the State Department says the Haqqani network is a terrorist
Yeah, we're talking
organization.
about the Afghani Taliban. I mean, these are bad guys. I mean, there's no question that they're bad guys. Of course they are. And I've laid that out, and I've said that today. But again, I go back to all the considerations that we put into play to substantially mitigate the risk to this country to get our POW back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Ms. Shea Porter.
Thank you. And Secretary Hagel, thank you very much for being here. And obviously, it's challenging circumstances. And I want to thank you for your service and say that you probably, more than most people in this room, know what it's like to be in combat and could imagine what it feels like to be left behind. So I want to thank you for that very principled stand, because we do have that policy, and we tell our men and women that we will not leave them behind. So I want to thank you for that. I do have some concerns, though, and one of the concerns is obviously, the trade, and I'm particularly concerned about why 5? Is that the minimum number that they would accept? Because looking at that, we got 1, they got 5, and we know that they are bad guys, like you said, and so I have some concerns about the number to begin with. Then I'm also would like to comment, and I'll let you wrap up with this, but I'd like to comment about the reintegration process. One of my colleagues suggested that there was something going on that you didn't just quickly bring him back. But I do remember watching our POWs from Vietnam coming back, and we learned a lot of lessons about dropping them right into American culture after having been isolated for so many years. And so my understanding is a reintegration process, and there's 3 stages, and that we have to allow the former prisoner to work his or her way through these stages. So I would like you to address that, and also why 5, and then I'd like to put my comment in that I do believe that Congress should have been notified. I probably split the difference here between my colleagues in that I understand why you might not tell all of Congress because of the sensitivity and the timing and the risk, but certainly I do believe the leadership of Congress should have been told. So anything else you'd like to add to that? I still have 3 minutes, and please tell me why there's 5, about a little bit about the reintegration process, and any other comments you'd like to add. Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you. On the reintegration process, I think everyone agrees that the principal focus now on Sergeant Bergdahl should be his health. Maybe someone disagrees with that, I don't know. But for us, for the military, that is getting him healthy enough, his body, mind, spirit, and that's the point of a reintegration process. Your point about what we've learned since POWs came back from Vietnam is an important point. We've learned a lot, our doctors have, our healthcare specialists have. Everybody's different to start with. Every situation is different to start with. So that's the focus. Let's get him healthy, mind, body, spirit, then we'll get on with the rest of it. The United States Armed Forces, and his family agrees with this, incidentally, we let the medical professionals make those calls.
And let me add, this doesn't mean that he won't have to answer questions. There are important questions that need to be answered. We're just waiting for him to be well enough.
That's right. As I said in my testimony, both the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army has already said there will be a comprehensive review
Right, and there should
of all
be.
the circumstances surrounding his disappearance,
And
every element of it.
And I thank you for that. Now, why
There-
5?
Just one other, and I'll get to that. One other point on that. I remind you again, you'll have an opportunity to look at the so-called Form 15-6, which does give a review at the time of his disappearance. It was signed off, I believe, in August of 2009. That's up here at the committee. Now, the 5. Okay, General Counsel's asked.
I just, before the Secretary addresses,
We won't, I'm sorry, we won't be able to, because my time's running out. I really would like the answer from the Secretary. but
Okay,
I
very
hope
well.
We can talk about that in closed meeting.
I
Thank
give
you.
shorter answers.
Thanks.
Why 5? Well, first, I have addressed this in other questions about how did that all come about. It originally was 6, and then we went back and forth over the years. They wanted all the Taliban prisoners, the Taliban did, wanted all
Right.
in Guantanamo and so on. And it settled at around 5. The 6th detainee died. So that's part of it. But I think there's a bigger issue here, too. The American people, the American society, our armed forces, has never seen life exchange of just one for one. We put a value on our American lives as the most important thing. Not that other societies don't. I can't speak for any other society, and I wouldn't try. But our society is, every human being is important. So why wasn't it 20? Why wasn't it 3? The 5 started to be what the Taliban insisted on. They wanted more, had been 6, then they wanted everything. So I don't think there's any magic to it. It just, that's the way it developed. But again, we don't put a one-for-one deal on our
Well, thank you. And I just want to reiterate that you can trust Congress to handle
Time's
this.
expired.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, Mr. Preston, thank you so much for joining us today. Secretary Hagel, let me go to the administration's own Guantanamo Task Force report, where they reviewed the files of these 5 detainees that were transferred and unanimously recommended in 2010 they continue to be held by the United States based on the specifics of their cases. The task force also said that it was conceivable with adequate security measures the 5 could be sent elsewhere eventually. In light of those recommendations, that these detainees continue to be kept, and that recommendation taking place when it did, can you tell us what extraordinary security measures can Qatar offer today to allow for this transfer?
Well, again, that's the essence of much of our mitigating dimension that why we signed off on the deal, those assurances the first year. Congressman, again, I will say, when we close this place down and go into the classified, we'll go into every one of those specifics. But I would tell you this, you may have already read the MOU, which we sent up here yesterday. And we'll be glad to take you down into the subparagraph 6 of each one of those to get to your question. But go beyond my testimony here. I don't want to do that. And if it's okay, we'll wait to.
Let me go back historically then and look at the history of Qatar and what they've done in receiving detainees. As you know, the first transfer to Qatar was in 2008. And was that one considered a successful test case?
I believe, and I just asked our general counsel if we've just had one transfer. Is that right, to Qatar?
to my knowledge.
So we've had one. I don't know all the history of that transfer, although my understanding is it wasn't particularly good, and generally. So what's changed? I again addressed this here this morning. But first of all, you have a new emir. We've got more presence, assets there. Their relationship with the area and with us is significantly changing. Now, are these absolute guarantees? No. I mean, there are very few absolute guarantees in life, as we all know. But I think the number of things have changed enough, significantly changed, to be able to have confidence in the enforcement that the emir told the President of the United States that he would personally see to that, as well as the government. And if you follow down, as you did, through your reading of those MOU requirements, and then we'll get into the details, we felt confident that MOU covered enough, but the enforcement was good enough.
You did acknowledge, though, that there was an additional risk there in Qatar taking those detainees, especially based on their past performance. So are you comfortable with that risk? And does this willingness for the U.S. to accept that risk, does that now set the stage for the U.S. transferring detainees to other nations who have not met obligations under previous agreements in accepting these detainees from Guantanamo?
Well, you said the right word, risk, and that is the essence of what we're always dealing with here. And the analysis that we made, the decision I made, as well as the National Security Council and ultimately the President, again, I say, we believe that all of this together could substantially mitigate the risk.
Let me ask this. There's some concern, too, that of those considerations given for the Qatari government and what they will do to keep up with these detainees, is there the opportunity for these detainees to go to the Qatari legal system to have these travel restrictions lifted so that under legal means they could actually have free reign to travel throughout Qatar or elsewhere?
Well, I'll ask the General Counsel. He signed the MOU, and I'm going to ask him to handle that in particular, that question, because he negotiated and signed it. Thank you.
I think the question is best answered in the closed session, if you would indulge us in that respect.
Okay. Well, let me close by asking this then. What happens to these detainees after a year?
As has been said, the restrictions of the MOU are for a one-year period. That includes the restriction on their travel outside of Qatar. So after 1 year.
So after 1 year, no restrictions?
Except under circumstances that we would discuss in the closed.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Maffei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Preston. I appreciate very much your service. Mr. Secretary, you said in your testimony that this was well, first of all, let me just say that I think a lot of people have had very emotional reactions to this and what they've seen about this with incomplete information. And I certainly think that's understandable. But these are difficult circumstances to judge, and we as elected officials and you as appointed officials have to put aside our emotions and political expediency in order to best use our professional judgment. And obviously what will be said in secret session also pertains to this. But what I'm concerned about now is the law and the notification of Congress. And you said in your testimony, I believe you actually used the word unique circumstances. I'm a little concerned that this isn't unique. It might be rare, but not all that unique. And do you believe that Congress hadn't thought this was a sort of issue that could come up when they passed the law? Should we amend this law if indeed these kind of very rapidly evolving situations occur where you would want to have the authority to do a prisoner transfer? First the Secretary, and then if Mr. Preston, or either one of you.
Well, here's the way I would answer your question. First, it was an extraordinary situation. And maybe everyone doesn't agree with that. I absolutely believe it. The President believed it. National Security Council leaders believed it for the reasons we've discussed here the last 3 hours, and actually more. So I think we're on pretty solid ground in saying that this was an extraordinary situation. I think it also gets into the constitutional issues that we have discussed here this morning. The responsibilities of the President given to him through Article 2 of the Constitution. What are his authorities under that article? It doesn't discount what the Congress passes as laws. And by the way, this is not the first challenge to a law by a president. As has been noted here this morning, President Bush, George W. Bush, probably signed as many signing statements as anybody executive, legislative differences exist probably since the beginning of the Republic. So I answer your question that way too, and then if you want to hear from the General Counsel.
Well, actually, let me just stick with it. I think you answered it fine, Mr. Secretary. I am concerned, though, that there was an opportunity to notify the Congress. I've heard some reports that 80 or 90 people in our administration knew. I don't know if you can confirm that or not. But the sort of the answer that it goes back to 2011, 2012, I agree with the chairman on that. That was a different set of circumstances. It was also, by the way, a different Congress. I wasn't in that Congress. It does concern me that many people knew and there wasn't some sort of a notification of Congress, particularly given that obviously the Qatari officials knew. How are we to avoid the perception that this administration trusts Qatari officials more than it trusts leaders in Congress?
Well, you may see it that way as a congressman, and I wouldn't question your perspective, but I would just say this. The Qataris had to be part of it because they were part of it. They were doing the deal. We signed the memorandum of understanding with them. There would have been no prisoner exchange without the Qataris. So not everybody, by the way, in the Qatari government was aware of this. And again, Preston was there. So I don't think it's a matter of we trust the Qataris, but we don't trust our own Congress. I've already addressed this too, as you know, Congressman, in my opening statement. Could we have done it better, smarter? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think my concern, and I'm not sure if this would rest in your office or not, my concern is, okay, I understand the circumstances under which the department was not able to obey the letter of the law. My concern is whether the department even tried to obey the spirit of the law, certainly not informing myself, rank and file member, but at least the leadership of the relevant committees that this was happening.
Well, again, I'll say, and I know members of this committee don't agree with this, but in explanation as to why we did what we did, and again, I'll say one sentence, we were very, very concerned about the risk. We had a fleeting opportunity here. We were told there was a risk. The more people who knew about it, the more risk. I get that. I get, well, why did you trust some in the White House and not here? I get all that. But your question, overall question about who knew and who didn't, I don't know about the 80 or 90 number. I can tell you from my responsibility at DOD, very, very few people knew about this at DOD.
Gentleman, time expired. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. I guess you've said that there were better ways to do this, there were more precise ways to do it. I guess my first question would be, is that because DOD was not in charge of this the entire time?
Congressman Hunter, I'm sorry. I just read a note. I apologize for that.
I need to add 20 seconds back on.
Take it out of my time. Would you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Was DOD in on this the whole time? You've said before that this could have been done better, and I'm guessing that means that if you were doing this from the beginning, this prisoner exchange, it would have been done better.
Well, I appreciate the comment, but yes, was DOD involved in this right from the beginning? Yes, we were.
Let me interject there then. We talked in February, and I said because the State Department had this option on the table, and they had pre-approval from the executive to go ahead with this prisoner exchange. This was months ago. You appointed Mr. Lumpkin as the OSD representative, this is just a few months ago, to the Bergdahl case.
Yes.
Which makes me think that you weren't heavily vested in this from the very beginning, but that you did get vested in it a few months ago.
Well, no, that's not true. You're right. Let's pick up February. And you're right. We had the conversation. You know, you had written me about this. I did appoint Lumpkin, who actually was the guy who oversaw the whole operation, as you know, from DOD, Mike Lumpkin. Congressman, this was so fast-moving. Everything you said is right. There was a break, and I've got the chronology right here.
I don't need that from you. What I'm asking was, okay, let me put it this way. Did you have other options that you looked at for approval or at least consideration, non-kinetic options? Non-kinetic options that you looked at for at least consideration?
You mean DOD?
You, yes, sir.
Yes. No, actually, this was the one option.
This was the only option that you considered? The only non-kinetic option you considered?
We consider everything, and we are, but where we were in the time frame you're talking about, in the scope of the reality here, this was the one option that we were all working toward that looked like the best. That's what Lumpkin did that's why I appointed him to get into it. You were exactly right in your...
Let me ask you again, did you have other non-kinetic options that you looked at for approval? Or at least consideration?
Not anything that was serious. I mean, we look at all kinds of things all the time.
Let me ask then,
commanders and so on.
So you didn't pass any other courses of action besides this one for the President's consideration from the Department of Defense?
If you're talking about this specific deal with Qatar,
talking about getting Bergdahl back, just getting Bergdahl back.
No, this was the one that was on the table that was the most realistic, viable, and no, we didn't present, that I'm aware of, anybody in DOD present any other.
Okay, well, let me ask this then. Why would the President approve, or you approve, only one course of action after seeing, now self-admittedly, no other courses of action? Why, I've never heard that where you only say, this is the one thing that we've chosen to do, and we're not going to consider any other courses of action besides this one. And that means that the President didn't even have any other options, non-kinetic options, from the Department of Defense that you recommended to him, because you just said that you recommended no other options but this one.
Well, Congressman, we weren't holding all the cards here. As you know, if the Taliban wasn't ready to engage...
forget about the Taliban. I'm not asking that. What I'm asking is, you have different courses of action. If I want to enter this room, I can come in through that door, or the door over there. What you're saying is you didn't look at any other doors except that one. You didn't consider any other options besides this prisoner exchange, and you only recommended to the President this one pathway to get Bergdahl back.
Congressman, this was the only pathway that was emerging that was available. There was no other pathway unless you're aware of.
Well, here's what I am aware,
okay.
actually, and these are not from special briefings, so I can probably mention a few of them.
Yeah.
But you had DOD, your department, working concurrent options with Pakistan to get Bergdahl's release. You had other options that we know that at least people in your department had looked at. Well, we won't go into those non-kinetic options, but it just astounds me that for something this large, that you wouldn't recommend to the President any other course of action but this one, and that the President of the United States would not have looked at other courses of action besides this one before he made the decision to approve this.
Well, two issues here. One is, do we always look at other courses of actions? Yes, we do. Second issue, recommending to the President. This was the most viable, best pathway we could find. We knew that was active. The Taliban were coming back. The Qataris were telling us they were coming back. So we pursued that as the most immediate, viable, and possible option we had to get him back.
Well, here's, in closing, I would think that there were better options, and I think that the President should have been better briefed by folks in your department that knew what those options were, and I hope that the DOD and Mr. Lumpkin takes a stronger role in trying to get the rest of the Americans back that were forgotten via this exchange in Afghanistan. I yield back.
Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again, and just want to say how great it is to see a member of the NCO Corps, the backbone of our military, at the head of the DOD. I served in Iraq with a Vietnam veteran, E7, who went back over at 59 years old, didn't make it home, and he probably is smiling and cussing at me right now and telling me I better treat you right. Look, I think your background and the background of all of us who've worn a uniform, and as you said, been in combat, informs how we feel about the release of Sergeant Bergdahl, as well as how we feel about someone who abandons their post and exposes their buddies to attack by the enemy. However, it's never been the practice of the United States to leave one of our own behind on the battlefield, regardless of the circumstances of their disappearance. We do everything we can to bring them home. You don't leave them to be dealt with by the enemy. It's not who we are as a country. It's not who we are as a military. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not questions that need to be answered about the circumstances around his departure from his post. And I would hope that the military will and take appropriate action to review the circumstances again And I have full faith in the leadership of the United States Army and the Uniform Code of Military Justice to conduct a thorough investigation and to carry out any justice that the result of a subsequent investigation may warrant. That said, I wanted to ask you two specific questions. First, are there any plans by the DOD or the Department of the Army to go back and review the circumstances of his disappearance? And then if it is found that he did abandon his post, so he did desert, that there will be an investigation, perhaps prosecution?
Congresswoman, yes, and thank you for your service, and to the other members of this committee who I didn't by name acknowledge, but I referenced, as you noticed in my testimony. Thank you for your service. Yes, as I noted in my testimony and a couple of the answers I've given this morning, Secretary of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army have both indicated, did last week, that they intended a full, comprehensive review of all the circumstances involved in the disappearance of Sergeant Bergdahl. The results of those reviews will determine if any action would be required based on conduct and based on the review. They feel strongly, and I do, but I'm not going to get involved in trying to influence that. That's a United States Army decision, as you know how this works. They are open to get the facts, and wherever the facts lead them, they'll get them, and they will respond appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have to ask me.
Would the gentlelady yield, please?
Yes, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Enyard.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you have a tremendous perspective, as Ms. Duckworth has alluded to, with your background as a combat infantryman. Now, I'm sure that you weighed every pro and con in this decision-making process, and your decision was made in the best interest of this nation based on the facts you had as a whole, I'm sure. And it's really unfortunate that the toughest decision that many of your critics have been making on this is as to whether or not they should run for re-election. Now, have you received a single or heard a single sound suggestion from any of these Monday morning quarterbacks as to a better course of action that you might have taken in this decision?
The cupboard's been rather bare on that account. We have a lot of experts in this town especially. But as I said, and I appreciate your service, sir, I'm well aware of it. In this town, it's pretty easy, or anywhere else, to give analysis, usually uninformed, and criticize every decision. That's okay. That's the role everybody has. The country is built that way. Everybody's opinion matters and counts. Everybody has one. But in the end, as I said in my testimony, some of us are dealing with the responsibilities of having to make the tough choices. You make them up here in your votes, and I make them. And that's the way it is, and that'll always be that way. So I just deal with it, and I do the best I can, and I do what I think is right for my country, and I don't have any problem sleeping.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time expired. They have called the votes. About 6 minutes left, but about 394 haven't voted yet. So I want to thank the Secretary. We've gone over what we thought it would take, but it's a very important issue, and this is the largest committee in Congress, and everybody wanted to have their questions answered. The Secretary has agreed. We will take one more question. Then we will break for votes. I would encourage all who have not had an opportunity to ask a question that want to return. The Secretary said he will stay for that. And then we will reschedule at a later time the closed session part. Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, we've talked about this 30-day notice. Yesterday, the chairman told us that he received notification after Sergeant Bergdahl had actually been transferred. I'm sure his Senate counterpart received that notice at the same time. It was really a notice after the fact. And I listened carefully through all the questions, all the legalese, the technical, the spin, everything. It's clear to me that really what happened here, and this goes back to the question from the previous gentleman, as to what else could have been done, has there been any other offers? My understanding is that back in 2011 and in 2012, when this issue was first brought forward, that Secretary Clinton opposed it without additional measures and protections. And I believe also Mr. Clapper and others as well, Congress, on a bipartisan basis, pushed back on this. And so it really suggests to me that when this erupted again this past January, that the President decided he didn't want to hear no. All he wanted to do was to move forward, get it done, and whatever thing he could do here in terms of lawyering or in-runs around Congress or whatever. I mean, it's been reported by many different agencies that at least 90 people in the executive branch knew about this, but yet the chairman of House Armed Services did not know about it. So, I mean, isn't this really just an attempt by the President to do an in-run around Congress to not take no for an answer or not get some pushback and maybe a little bit of wisdom from people who've been around here a long time and have been elected?
Congressman, the President of the United States, like every President of the United States, and as you know, has not just constitutional responsibilities, but moral responsibilities on behalf of every American. And his first responsibility is the security of this country. And I have never seen, in the time I've known him, and I've known him since he's been in the Senate, and I've been in this job about 15 months, ever a time he flinched on that. Now, you may disagree with decisions he's made, but there was no political decision here. Now, on Clinton and Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence has already made a statement on his agreement with this.
Right, but he first opposed it, is my understanding.
He did, but he explained why he has changed his position.
All right, but let me move on.
As did, by the way, Secretary Clinton's situation was the same. It was a different world in 2011, 2012, for all the reasons we
All I'm saying is there's a benefit to more heads, more wisdom in this, and I think the President really didn't want to hear no. He wanted to do this no matter what. Let's go to number two here.
He wanted to make sure we could get our POW back, but not no matter what.
Right. I understand.
You all were driving this as the American people.
I didn't say no matter what. That wasn't my statement. Now, as far as who had control of Sergeant Bergdahl, we keep hearing about the Taliban, but the reports have all been it was a Haqqani network. You yourself, I think, suggested that. We know the Haqqani network is a terrorist, an international terrorist organization. We all agree with that. And so ultimately, just because we have a surrogate, in this case Qatar, who is going between, who's acting as an agent, how is that not negotiating with terrorists?
Well, first, let's look at the objective here. It's to get our prisoner of war back, who was a prisoner of war. It was a prisoner exchange.
I get that, but I mean,
between,
but again, aren't we
Taliban.
violating a commitment, a doctrine that we've had for decades by doing that?
No.
How is that not negotiating with terrorists? Simply because we put someone in between, how is that any better than direct negotiation?
We engaged with the government of Qatar.
Wouldn't the
other end of
same?
it was the Taliban, a combatant against us in war.
But still surrogates nonetheless. So would the outcome have been any differently if we talked directly with the Haqqani?
I mean, you and I disagree on that, and
I don't think it would, and I don't hear you saying that it would be any different. So, but anyway,
you didn't hear me say what?
I didn't hear you say that it would be any different. You're saying you didn't know, and I think
I'm saying I didn't know what? What are you saying?
that the outcome would be any different whether we talked with
I didn't say that.
Haqqani Network
I
direct.
didn't
You think
say
the
that.
outcome would be
not
any
at all.
different?
We were very clear who we were talking to and why, and following the law. That's what I said in my testimony. I've said it all morning.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time expired. Okay, we will recess for the 2 votes. I would encourage the members return as soon as possible so we can finish up the questioning.
Hi, Walter.
Committee's in recess.